So welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Jung and I'll be your moderator for this session. I'm at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We have a great lineup for you this morning. So our session is called Using QE to Understand Psychosocial Needs. And I think the papers in this session do a great job of highlighting this in different ways and in different contexts, many within the medical field. So just to recap how the session will work, we have 4 papers that will be presented. Each presenter has 10 minutes to present their work. And then after that, we will have time for open discussion with the authors. Feel free to place questions in the chat. You can also use the raise hand function if you want, if you have a question that you'd like to ask. I'm happy to either read your question for you from the chat, or I may first ask if you want to go ahead and ask your question. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our first paper. And all of the presenters, while I'm introducing you, you can go ahead and pull up your presentation and go ahead and get started. So our first paper is Comparing Parent and Physician Perspectives on the Transition to Palliative Care in Pediatric Oncology.
Thank you, Sarah. I try to share my screen now. Hopefully it works. Okay, so can you see it now? Perfect, thank you.
Yes.
And if I change, okay,
yep, looks good.
Okay, then I should get started. So hi everyone, my name is Judith Nyírő. I'm from Semmelweis University, Hungary, and this is my first ICQE. So I'm really excited to show you our results, at least some partial results from this study. So to begin with, I'd like to quickly tell you what the definition of palliative care is. So this is a complex care which isn't directed at curing the disease itself, but rather aims to fulfill all physical, psychosocial, spiritual needs. So it's really all about quality of life and supportive care, and just supporting that person and their families. So to bring it into the context of children's cancer care, one of the emerging issues is actually how to integrate palliation into the everyday clinical practice. And there isn't a gold standard solution for this issue. And I just want to give you a taste of the models that exist currently. So on this figure on the left, you can see blue means cancer treatment and green is palliative care. And in row A, there's this model which is quite typical, where palliative care is only introduced at the end of life as a sort of end of life care. And in other cases, it can also coexist next to active oncological care. And as the disease progresses, it can take on increasing significance. So our goal would be, and it is really challenging, to always find the best and choose the best model for each family, which is the most beneficial. And to do that, we need, first of all, resources like palliative professionals, hospice houses. We also need clear definitions and education on what palliative care means. And most importantly, we need to understand the preferences of the affected families and patients to give the best care possible. And we had a very similar aim with 2 previous projects with our research group. So we wanted to explore how the implementation of palliative care happens in the Hungarian pediatric oncology practice. So we had interviews with pediatric oncologists and parents, and we looked at how this implementation happens in terms of timing, circumstances, its participants. And from these results, I'd just like to show you one, the timing. So in Hungary, this first model very much prevails. So palliative care is equaled as end-of-life care in children's cancer care. And there's a very clear border between the 2 forms of care. So this transition is actually signified or symbolized by one single conversation in most cases between parents and physicians. And we named this discussion the palliative care discussion. So that was a very clear result. But we also had some questions which were left unanswered and very ambiguous data from the analysis using Atlas. So we wanted to approach this through a secondary analysis, and this is the aim of our current project, is to look at the verbal and nonverbal properties of the palliative care discussion, and also the psychologist's role in it. And we wanted to gain a deeper understanding by comparing, first of all, the physician and parental preferences, and also compare these results with the previous data. And we hope that through this deeper understanding, we could provide some sort of communication strategies or advice for professionals. So as I said before, our data consisted first from previous interviews with active physicians of all of the centers of the Hungarian Pediatric Oncology Network, and also with parents from 3 of these centers who lost their child to cancer between 1 and 5 years prior to the interview. The first step was to pre-register the study at the OSF registries, and then we developed our codes using relevant codes from the previous study, which they kept the definitions, but we also renamed them in some cases. And after that, coding and segmentation was done by one rater using the IRAC. After coding and segmentation, we merged all of our sources using the IRAC-R package, and then visualized our data with the ENA to look at the connections between the codes. So overall, we had 20 interviews with physicians, and we talked to 27 parents. So by parents, some of them wished to be interviewed with their spouse. So overall, we had 23 interviews with parents. And by the children, I just like to mention that the diagnosis in all cases was some sort of solid tumor, and in most cases, a high-risk brain tumor. Our code structure consisted of 3 clusters based on each research questions. And in this presentation, I just like to show you the results of the first question, which is about communication content. And in our previous study, there were 6 content elements, which we wanted to examine in more detail how they relate to each other, and also how they relate to positive and negative appraisal. So here you can see the weighted networks for both physicians and parents. And in both networks, positive appraisal, it took dominance, and you can see like positive in this case means that that content element was deemed to be important or relevant in the discussion. And by physicians, we identified 3 codes which had the strongest connection to this code. So first of all, child's interest. It involves all instances when the physician expressed or put the child's needs into center, when he talked about how the parents should communicate with their child. Then we also had information which involved or included practicalities regarding palliative care, and also trying. So trying meant that the physician did not keep the parents back from trying other alternative therapies or going abroad for other treatment centers. So we can see that the physician network was, we can say it's quite diverse. And compared to that, in the parental network, one code took dominance, and it was support. And support means that the physician, when he was giving information or advice, he always expressed his active help and his active involvement in palliative care. And he considered it important to say that just because they could not cure the child, he won't leave the family alone to their own devices, and he will be there until the end of the course of the disease. Here you can see the subtracted mean networks and different graph, and it also shows very nicely how, for example, the mean network locations and the confidence intervals are quite distant from each other, and the difference between the perspectives of the 2 networks. So again, I just like to highlight how parents considered it very important that the doctor emphasized and wanted to know how they will manage this new situation. And also in the physician conversation, giving information and advice took priority, and For example, they advise the parents to continue life as normal as possible and gain experiences together. And one other result I'd like to show you using these codes is how the parental network results compared to the previous ones using Atlas. So when we were coding with Atlas, we did not standardize segmentation beforehand. We had 2 individual raters and coded on interview levels, and also only look at the absolute frequencies of the codes and did not explore how they were related to each other or their co-occurrence. So it's very interesting to see how 2 different methodologies have or deliver a very different message, because here support takes absolute center in the parental network, and it isn't even in the top 6 or 7 content elements in this table in our first line analysis. So I would like to go into the discussion on that note and say that through these ANA networks, so they portray the same data from a different dimension, and we would have missed out on this dimension had we not done the second line analysis. And it was, for me at least, a very valuable lesson, how different methods can complement and supplement or confirm previous data. And it will also shape how I look at research planning in the future when I do my next qualitative project. And the other point I'd like to mention is how parents' preference was very clear for a one-person lead oncologist-centered communication. And so this is, I think, I would consider it one of our key findings, because it truly shows how in Hungary, it isn't about having more hospice houses or palliative professionals. It's all about making this model more sustainable. And this is one message we can give or deliver to professionals when we talk to them about this topic. So from our limitations, I like to stress that physicians gave general opinions. So they did not talk about one family. Meanwhile, parents obviously talked about one single discussion with one physician. And yeah, I would like to thank all of our interviews, and doctors and parents alike, and thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Wonderful, thank you so much. It looks like we have a round of applause there. Just a reminder that we'll save all questions for after all of the presentations, but if you want to start putting anything in the chat, you are most welcome to. Our next paper is mapping the content structure of online diabetes support group activity on Facebook.
Hello, I start screening my test. There
you go.
Can you see it?
Yep.
Is it okay? Okay. So my name is Anna Jenai, and I will present about mapping the content structure and of online diabetes support group activity on Facebook. Currently, diabetes is one of the most prevalent chronic disease, which requires self-management to control symptoms and negative effects. So patients need to pay attention to nutrition, sleep, exercise, and perform insulin-related tasks daily. Having such disease often comes with stigma, which may lead the patients to feel isolated from others. And because of this, 2 things, people with diabetes often express a strong need for peer support. One manifestation for this is online diabetes communities, and social media has advantages as a place for support groups, such as availability, anonymity, selective disclosure, and social networking. In these groups, patients can obtain information, share opinions and experiences, and receive support as well. Our objective was to examine diabetes online community discourse in Hungarian diabetes-related Facebook groups in order to map the content and the structure of information that patients are sharing. We had 2 research questions. The first is what kind of content is shared in patient self-help groups and how do patients interact with these. And the second is how these pieces of information related to each other. Findings were compared to the functionality of e-health tools available to Hungarian patients to understand what these tools may be lacking and what development would be useful for diabetes self-management. Next, I will speak about the methods we use. To investigate, we used Facebook as it is the most commonly used social media platform in Hungary. And we included 2 public groups that were founded by adult patients of diabetes, and the language is Hungarian. And we sampled 200 threads from the website. We examined posts which were created from March 13 in 2020, at the beginning of the first COVID-related lockdown in Hungary. And in our repository, you can find more information about our methods. Code development and coding were performed by 4 researchers, and the process had several stages and included both inductive and deductive coding. The final code book had 3 parents and 16 child codes. We had codes reflecting activities, appraisal, and content. Activity codes included asking and giving help, social support, social regulation, and sharing. Appraisal manifested as satisfaction and dissatisfaction, and the content codes were instruments, lifestyle, healthcare, pharmacies, COVID test values, products, insulin rate, and symptoms. And we calculated inter-rater reliability. Here you can see our kappa values. The reproducible open kit was used for segmentation, coding, and preparing our data for analysis. Here is an example about what a source looks like in our project. At the top, you can see the attributes in yellow. In green, you can see the unique identifier of this thread. Underneath, we can see the post and the section delimiter showing us where the comments begin. Each turn of tag is a new line, and each utterance has a unique identifier. The quotes are placed at the end of the lines colored with blue. And epistemic network analysis was used for analysis. We uploaded our qualitative data, prepared with IROC to this web tool. It was used because it is the most applicable tool for analyzing codes and their co-occurrences. With this, we could create networks and model our data. Here you can see the parameters and the main networks. And next I will talk about our results. The most prominent codes were give, help, and lifestyle. And their co-occurrences was also prominent, which means that patients most frequently asked help about the lifestyle, especially what to eat or when to eat. And there were some differences between the 2 groups. In group 1, there were strong connections among give, help, symptoms, pharmacies, as well as lifestyle, social support, and social regulation. And the strongest connection was between giving help and pharmacies. Group 2 was more focused on giving help and sharing in connection with lifestyle. And this difference was because in the second group, there were many posts about receipts, for example. And in the first group, it was more common that people had questions about, for example, diabetes medication, health parameters, and symptoms. And here you can see some of our most interesting findings and some quotes as examples for these findings. First, we saw an explicit guidance from experienced people with diabetes for newly diagnosed patients regarding illness and self-care related information, for example, about insulin, side effects, symptoms, and nutrition. Secondly, there were threats about issues which can be discussed with peers and not health professionals, because they are practical questions and can only be answered by those who have first-hand experiences. And thirdly, we saw a sense of support and community in response to those sharing problems, questions, or experiences. For example, congratulating peers on good glucose level or novel recipes. Social moderation was also present, especially when more contestable statements were made. These were frequently negotiated among group members until a consensus was reached. Our suggestion for e-health tool development is an automated connection between patients, doctors, and dietitians. Moreover, opportunities to connect peers to support each other, it would be also beneficial. Furthermore, an automatized connection between application and tools such as blood glucose meter would make the life of people with diabetes much easier. Finally, our project had several limitations. For example, engagement, visual and external content was not included in our study. Moreover, we examined only 2 public groups, while private groups may have different behavior, and we had no data about individuals, so we couldn't record any of, for example, demographic data. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Round of applause. And I apologize, there's literally an excavator outside my window right now, so hopefully you can't hear it. Our next paper in our session is called Quality and Safety Education for Nursing in Virtual Reality Simulations, a Quantitative Ethnographic Examination.
Thank you, Sarah. I will quickly share my screen. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us from all the different places that I see being reflected here. So I'd like to begin by introducing our team. We are a group of educators and researchers collaborating across academia and industry. The faces might be familiar here. Amanda and Brendan are at UW-Madison, and Holly and I are at Elsevier, a company where we work in the area of nursing and health education. And I think it's important to spotlight that our team is unique in our collaboration across academia and industry, and also that we build upon our interdisciplinary expertise in quantitative ethnography, learning sciences, nursing education, educational technology to study the effectiveness of virtual reality simulations for clinical readiness. So within our context, developing students' clinical readiness is a high priority for pre-licensure nursing programs. And naturally, exposure to clinical situations is recognized as a cornerstone approach to engage undergraduate nursing students in domain-related activities. But there are practical barriers to how frequently and deeply students can immerse themselves in these authentic situations. So virtual reality offers a paradigm shift in how nursing students interact with content and peers and develop the requisite skills for becoming practice ready. And the COVID-19 pandemic only accelerated these shifts and gave us extra impetus to study the effectiveness of simulation learning system with virtual reality that we developed at Elsevier. So I'll play a short video and mute the audio, but you'll get a brief insight on what SLS with VR looks like while I provide additional research context. Okay, let me make sure. Okay. So we're witnessing a surge in studies that demonstrate the effectiveness of VR simulations in nursing education. and specifically with regards to the impact of these high fidelity experiences on students' affect and cognition and psychomotor skills. But what we notice is that most studies examine the effectiveness of VR on isolated skills, isolated clinical skills to be precise, like whether a student can learn how to insert a catheter, and they're important for sure. But we know that clinical situations are complex and ever evolving. So if we can demonstrate that participating in VR allows faculty and students to mimic the clinical experience, that would be a really valuable contribution. And thankfully, our team had many QE papers and past projects to seek inspiration from. QE techniques such as epistemic network analyses and multimodal analytics have been served as a valuable approach in health education to create models of situated action, really to generate representations of participation in simulated and actual clinical settings. So in this paper, we modeled faculty and student discourse in simulation learning system with virtual reality and associated debriefing sessions to interpret how quality and safety education for nurses are practiced in the context of a fundamentals of nursing scenario. Over to you, Holly. Oops.
Great, thanks, Mamta. So just to give a little bit of a look inside nursing education, the Quality and Safety Education for Nurses, or QSEN, framework was designed to prepare nurses with the competencies necessary to continuously improve the quality and safety of the healthcare system in which they work. So QSEN competencies include patient-centered care, teamwork and collaboration, evidence-based practice, quality improvement, safety, and informatics. And each competency is operationalized along with knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are important for students to develop during their pre-licensure nursing education period. Now, existing research suggests that nurses with a strong foundation in these principles of patient safety and quality care are better able to assimilate into the current complex healthcare environment. Specific QSEN competencies are important to be introduced into a fundamentals nursing course. As such, we used patient-centered care, coded as PCC, teamwork and collaboration, TCC, and safety as our primary codes in tracing how SLS with VR simulation and associated debriefing afforded faculty and students those experiences. Methodologically, also, it made sense to be selective in our codes. Being conservative with our choice of codes helped with demonstrating effectiveness of SLS with VR. So when we coded some utterance of, say, PCC, we were sure that it demonstrated that competency. Now, Fundamentals is a foundational course in undergraduate nursing education. The objectives of a fundamental course may include an emphasis on developing students' competencies in such areas as communication and collaboration, implementation of holistic, evidence-based safe patient care, and demonstration of professional values of caring. Clinical experiences during the early stages of nursing education can vary widely and are often inconsistent even within a single program. Additionally, fundamental clinical experiences often focus on those routine tasks and skill completion without the opportunity for higher level thinking, problem solving, or collaboration. Typically, simulation can be first implemented into a fundamentals course and then threaded throughout the nursing curriculum. Now, research demonstrates that early years in nursing education programmatic journey are characterized by anxiety and patient interaction, budding practice with critical thinking, and psychomotor skills that need further mastery. And the use of simulation at this level has proven beneficial for all of those. However, much of the existing literature considered simulation as a means of assessing the competency of the psychomotor clinical skills. Beyond the assessment of psychomotor skills, there's a glaring need to further our understanding regarding how simulation helps students achieve those fundamental course objectives. So the purpose of fundamental scenarios that we chose for this paper was to provide students with the opportunity to conduct a basic nursing assessment while managing and prioritizing multiple distractions. Specific objectives and identifiable actions that the faculty and students have access to throughout the scenario materials in SLS with VR are visible here in this table.
Thank you, Holly. So like Holly mentioned, as part of this fundamental scenario, students practiced meeting and assessing a patient for care. And here in the simulation, students were provided opportunities to demonstrate knowledge and skills and attitudes of patient-centered care, safety, as well as teamwork and collaboration. For example, a student asked the patient, could you rate your pain on a scale of 0 to 10, 0 being no pain and 10 being the worst pain, indicating knowledge and skills that are essential for patient-centered care. And after discussing pain and other symptoms with the patient, the student then summarized the assessment for the doctor, indicating a move towards teamwork and collaboration. Now, each time the teacher facilitated this scenario, students got experience communicating patient preferences to another member of the healthcare team. Also, during the simulation phase, the instructor challenged the students to address patient privacy concerns. So in this case, the instructor posed as the patient's employer, a virtual character, and requested medical information and updates. With this experience, students explored ethical and legal implications of patient-centered care while providing the necessary sensitivity and respect for the patient's privacy, an indication of patient-centered care as it related to a specific skill. And the students dealt with a belligerent employer and had to navigate communicating with the employer without releasing private health information as a potential error, practicing safety. What was unique is that after the simulation, we spent time looking at the debriefing phase. And during this time, the instructor facilitated the debriefing session, providing students the opportunity to draw attention to specific topics and push students to consider alternative decisions and actions. So like in the simulation, connections between the importance of both centering patients' needs, as in PCC, and communicating those needs to members of the care team, DCC, but safety also an topic during debriefing. The instructor helped students identify errors as well as safety-related issues that arose during simulation. In one example, the faculty made sure students understood the appropriate identification of the patient, allergies, and prioritization of assessment and interventions, a nice combination of PCC and safety knowledge and attitudes. And while discussing how students assess their patients, the instructor focused on how students use standardized practices and tools to ensure patient safety. She asked students, so when you took the dressing off, did you wear gloves? And this simple question about basic safety practice was used to further discuss connecting what they did in the simulation with real-world practices and past experiences. To emphasize the importance of teamwork and collaboration and safety, the class then discussed the importance of maintaining a closed-loop communication to protect patients' rights, but remaining in open communication with the providers. So navigating who needs to know what led to further discussion about the importance of effective communication between the student nurses, the patient, and other members of the healthcare team, which showed many connections between patient-centered care, teamwork, collaboration, and safety. Now, when we compare the findings for the two phases, it's clear that in both phases, students and faculty made strong connections between PCC and DCC. However, in the simulation phase, the group made more connections between PCC and safety. On the other hand, in the debriefing phase, the instructor and participants made more connections between PCC and safety. So despite these commonalities and connection patterns between PCC and DCC, there were systematic and statistically significant differences between the two phases. And the big difference between these two phases is how the discourse made, or how faculty and students made connections to safety. To sort of, get us closer to the end of this conversation, using the QSEN competency framework to study SLS with VR simulation and debriefing activities, we are able to demonstrate how undergraduate nursing students can be supported to identify with professional nursing roles that reach far beyond tasks and skills and procedures, and really helps us to start getting into how can we support students' clinical competency in a more comprehensive manner.
Yeah, so our takeaway is really recognizing that advances in digital technologies, in this case, virtual reality, and research methods such as QE can really usher in new directions in nursing education, especially as it relates to shaping students' clinical readiness, which is such an important focus. What we have in progress is a QE study to evaluate traditional in-person hands-on simulation and VR simulation in nursing education. And the goal here isn't just to identify one as superior to the other, but really to consider how each complements the other and contributes to a more holistic educational experience, optimal practice readiness. And our next goal will be embracing participatory QE and examining the effectiveness of simulated clinical experiences, such as those with simulation learning system with virtual reality.
Thank you all for your time, and thanking you all on behalf of Nana, Brendan, Holly, and myself. Please read the full paper. Hope our presentation gave you some insight into what you can expect, and write to us. We'd love that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right. The last paper of our session this morning, and then we'll move into the question portion, is How Anxiety Affects Affect, a quantitative ethnographic investigation using affect detectors and data-targeted interviews.
Hi, everyone. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yep, looks good.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Andres. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania. I'm a member of the Penn Center for Learning Analytics. And today I will be presenting our work on How Anxiety Affects Affect, a quantitative ethnographic investigation using affect detectors and data-targeted interviews. So I will begin by mentioning that as technology advances, we can scale up the collection of rich ethnographic data that would otherwise only be available in small-scale studies. One example would be the qualitative observations of affect, where specific affective experiences are critical. However, they're often hard to spot in the moment. So by taking a quantitative approach to directing student observations, we can collect qualitative data from fleeting yet educationally relevant experiences. For this study, we will be specifically looking at in-the-moment affect and student anxiety, both of which have been shown to have short-term and long-term effects on students. So our approach to quantitative ethnography blends quantitative and qualitative methods to enable scalable qualitative analyses that overall supports a deeper examination of what learners do and why. More specifically, this study employs a quantitative ethnography methodology that uses real-time affect detection to direct in situ open-ended interviews, where students are encouraged to talk about their learning experiences, strategies, and interests. And these interviews are then analyzed to examine the interplay between student affect and anxiety. So our study uses a platform called Betty's Brain, which is an open-ended, interactive, computer-based learning system. And it uses a learning by teaching paradigm where students teach a virtual agent named Betty about scientific phenomena such as climate change and thermoregulation, by using a concept map, which is composed of entities and links. The platform itself was developed for students in the 5th and 6th grade. Specifically within this study, we look at 99 6th graders who were observed in the school year 2018 to 2019 and were observed in a urban public school in Mid-South USA, observed at 2 different time periods as well. As students use Betty's Brain system, they generate interaction log data, and we apply previously developed affect detectors to each of these for every student, producing a confidence value that corresponds to their in-the-moment affect. And what is presented here is the prevalence of affective states, and we look specifically at engaged concentration, delight, boredom, confusion, and frustration. And in some instances, these clips were logged with no affect. We also collected student interviews, which were collected over the course of these 2 different time periods, as mentioned earlier. and we had a total of 594 interviews, 358 collected from study 1 and 236 collected from study 2. The collection of these interviews were prompted by an app developed within a research team called Quick Red Fox, which applies automated detectors of student affect that can detect affective changes in real time to prompt these interviews. Student anxiety was measured using a revised version of the math anxiety scale, and previous studies have established its internal consistency with a Cronbach's alpha of 0.87. The scale itself consists of 10 items scored on a 5-point Likert. And what is presented here to the right is the range of anxiety scores we got within both studies, which range from a score of 4 to 44 with a mean score of 22.35. And for both studies, we have 46 students who were scored at above average anxiety and 49 below average anxiety. Moving over to our results, linear mixed effects models were used to assess how student affect changes over time. In study 1, a significant interaction between anxiety and the time into session was detected when predicting frustration. Student anxiety had no effect on frustration levels early in the session, but later in the session, these levels diverged, and students with above average levels of anxiety were more significantly likely to get frustrated than their lower anxiety peers. This finding was replicated in study 2, and these same set of students were also significantly less likely to experience boredom, engage concentration, and delight later in the session. Moving on to any behavioral changes between these two groups, we examined student actions completed within 20 seconds following an instance of frustration. And from that, we collected 38 types of student interactions, which we compared using t-tests between these two groups. Only study 2 showed any significant differences between above average and below average anxiety students, where higher anxiety students had a higher tendency to move causal map elements and delete entities, and they made these deletions less effectively than their below average anxiety peers. And below average anxiety students were more likely to delete causal links and take quizzes. However, it is also important to note that after the application of post hoc correction, only the relationship between below average anxiety students and the deletion of causal links remain significant. So these results have to be treated as suggestive, but for now are inconclusive. Moving on to our interviews, we analyzed interviews that were collected or conducted within an 80-second window after a frustration prediction. And using that criteria, we have a subset of 28 out of the 594 interviews. And these were analyzed to look specifically at the behavioral and experiential differences between anxiety groups. We found 3 main differences based on these interviews, which pertain to the deletion of items, perception and behavior around quizzes, and the overall reception of feedback. So the findings around deletion of items is supported by previous findings in the quantitative side of our analyses. And to avoid being redundant, I will just read the quotes from our interviews. And we have students here saying, I had to delete most of my web because I was getting really confused about it, and I needed to start over because then that'll be easiest for me. And their behavior and perception around quizzes, we see here that less anxious students are more likely to take quizzes after becoming frustrated, and they show a greater willingness to collect evidence based on where and how they went wrong. Quoted here, I want to see where I can add something or see where it's wrong. And higher anxiety students were more apprehensive about quizzes, take less quizzes and use them less productively. And instead of using them to make improvements on themselves, they take quizzes to calm any distress they're feeling about not knowing all the answers. Quoted here, I haven't taken an everything quiz and I'm not getting anything good on other quizzes. And lastly, their reception of feedback. Higher anxiety students interpret struggles with the material as communicating something more general about their competence and are seemingly unable to process the help they are being given. The student here mentions it doesn't really tell you how to use it and it's not being very specific. So across all our interviews, we see a general pattern where students with higher anxiety appear to be less able to regulate their own learning processes, perhaps because they see it as something they are unable to fully control, or possibly are overlooking or deliberately skipping resources that could help their learning because they do not recognize these opportunities when they are being given to them. So, just to summarize, the current study demonstrates how trait level anxiety measures can help quantitatively differentiate state level affective experiences, shown through our results, which reveal a temporal divergence across affective states with frustration, engaged concentration, and delight. And these changes are potentially driven by anxious fixation on challenges, which impede any increased focus students may have on their own academic goals and lead them to focus on the source of their frustration. And the study demonstrates that interviews can be used to contextualize codified affect and behavior in elaborated narratives. Future work should examine anxiety at a similar timescale to affect, though this would require a state-level anxiety measure. No real-time detection of affect is available yet, so we have had to study anxiety in terms of what it has impacted. This is because anxiety is generally not included in classroom observation affect protocols, as it's harder to measure in this fashion. So additional effort will be needed to collect the training data to develop an automated detector of anxiety. In conclusion, this work takes a step towards better understanding anxiety in an ecologically valid setting and brings us closer to better supporting high anxiety students using learning technology in the classroom. Thank you very much. And we'll take questions or emails if anyone wants to reach out.
Thank you so much. Fantastic presentations, everyone. We have about 10 minutes left in our session, so I'm going to jump right into questions that folks have for our speakers. And I can get us rolling with one as people are thinking and either putting in the chat or feel free to raise your hand. You know, and this is something that came up at one of the workshops yesterday too. Just thinking about the complex environments that you're all working in and the different types of analyses that you've done, including quantitative and multiple types of qualitative potentially. I think sometimes our results integrate well and sort of make sense in the story that they tell together, and sometimes they don't, right? We get maybe almost conflicting findings depending on how we look at our data. So I'm just wondering from all of you as you were doing this, how did you sort of integrate that and your findings, both given the differences in the analyses that you were doing and how they inform each other, but also some of you are working with quite interdisciplinary teams as well who might have different interpretations of the findings. So this is really a question for all of the presenters. If anyone has a thought to start us off.
I can share some insight.
Great, thanks, Mamta.
Sure. So like Holly pointed out, for our project, we made a decision to keep our number of codes that we decided very small, like 3. Although we know that within those larger codes also there are many knowledge and skills and attitudes that we need to look at, and hopefully in the future we will validate them. So if you recall, both our primary plots were very simple, like you sort of basically just see triangles, simple looking triangles. But I think to really get into the complexity of what are those simple models saying for each of those phases, we had to go back to the data several times. And Amanda Vareni is here, and I know she made some really nice points yesterday about how do you always, like, you got to keep your eyes, and David used a really nice metaphor for what Amanda was describing as her approach, was just having your eyes on multiple things at the same time. Like, you got to look at your models, you got to see what patterns are emerging, and then go back to the data, come back to those models again. So having that iterative cycle always to really see what story is emerging. So so coming back, our models might initially seem very simple, but then you start looking at the differences between the two phases, and then how that safety, the code of safety just drives big shifts in the two phases. And I think we could only say that for sure, by sort of juggling between both the visualization and what the data was saying. And just one last thought to add to that. In one of the papers that Amanda, Brandon, and Holly and I are working right now, we've added another theoretical sort of lens to what is valued in clinical spaces in nursing education. And we've added more codes to our data. And now we're sort of looking at a we're looking to tell a more complex story than we said today.
Yeah, Sylvie.
Thank you. I just had a follow-up question for Mamta. So you described your project as you consciously wanted to keep it low, like a low number of codes, right? So 3 codes, and then we'll elaborate that. Was that really a conscious decision? And if so, what was kind of the rationale behind that? And did you have to kind of hit your own hand when you wanted to add codes at the beginning?
Sure. So one of the key reasons why we stuck to those 3 codes was we went back to the literature and we read about, so fundamentals, the scenario that we chose, we looked at the literature on what skills from the cues and competencies are valued for students who are early in their nursing sort of programs or nursing program journeys. And when they're in a fundamentals course, what kinds of skills are necessary for them to cultivate? The students are sometimes in a 4-year program, and Holly can add more to that, but the decision came from not just keeping it simple for us, but really what was valued, from what is known as research. And Holly is also a clinical simulation educator. So Holly, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. It was really the population of students we were working with and what was appropriate for that level of student. So that really helped us key in on and helped us keep those codes, to that small, really manageable, but also so that we could dig deeply into how those early nursing students engaged in those aspects of the QSEM competencies. And knowing that that's something moving forward, and as they progress in their journey, we could look at how they add on evidence-based practice and quality improvement, things that as they gain nursing knowledge, they're able to also practice and demonstrate.
And I'll just add one last thing. The faculty who ran these simulations, the one that we shared today, she was a fundamentals instructor as well. And that provided additional sort of, a more emic perspective to make a decision about why those codes were valuable, because in looking at her pre-survey responses in terms of what she was hoping to sort of support her students when she engaged them in a fundamental scenario, those were some of the aspects that she hoped to expose her students to. So we wanted to see if by engaging her students in SLS with VR, is she actually able to meet her goals? Because one of the things in nursing education, one of the challenges is, simulations are highly regarded, but the challenge is faculty don't always have the assessment tools to demonstrate the richness that goes on in simulation spaces. And so our attempt was also to keep it simple for the nursing faculty who are interested in exactly in fundamentals, I want to, in a fundamentals course, I want my students to gain these kind of cues and competencies. Can you tell me if my simulation practices and the tools that you offer, can I support those goals? So also thinking from a more participatory perspective, can we go back to our faculty and say, hey, you know what, we heard you and we know from your goals that, you know, in fundamentals classes, these are the skills that you want to help your students develop. And here, you know, with your practices, we can now demonstrate for you that here's how your class did.
Great. Thank you both so much. Do we have other questions for our speakers? Yeah, Jamie.
So naturally, my question is about Anna and Sylvie's diabetes project, because that's sort of my area of specialty. Perhaps I missed it, but what was the differences between the two groups that you were comparing? And then as a follow-up question, what did you find in your data around therapies or modes of therapies? So continuous glucose monitors, insulin pump versus multiple daily injection, et cetera. Because a lot of peer support in online communities involves how people are managing. And then also DIY loopers, which is sort of a hot topic as well.
Anna, do you want to answer?
I don't mind if you answer.
Okay. So if I remember correctly, Jamie, you asked the difference between the two groups and then the instruments and kind of modes of, okay. So I guess the latter is a little bit easier to answer. Pumps, there's not so much uptake. So it wasn't, the discussions weren't centered around pumps at all. And there was a lot of discussion around different areas on the body where you can inject insulin. And that's something that people didn't really get from their medical practitioner, that information. So that was one of the most prominent things that they were talking about. And in terms of the differences in the two groups, I would say that one of the groups was just incredibly hung up on recipes. And it is like every second post was about, hey, look at this wonderful cake that I'm baking, and we can eat it at this point at the day, and it'll be, you know, if you even it out, then it'll be okay, and stuff like that. And a lot of feedback on those types of, like, yum, I'm going to try this next week, you know, that kind of conversation. So very much centered around food and nutrition. And then the other group was very keen to share, like, specific parameters, specific measurements, like like before the first meal, blood sugar levels, that sort of thing. And they were very helpful in each other's kind of supporting each other, but also meant on what is healthy and what's a good measurement, right? So that was also very important to see how these debates, I guess, get resolved and a group consensus is reached over social media, where people kind of lash out on each other for a while, and then the group settles on, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah. So I'm going to put in the chat here the link for the community chat where we can continue some of these conversations. And I'd also encourage folks to follow up on Slack and read the papers. I've read all of these. They're fantastic, and reach out to the authors. So thank you all for being here, and see you in the next sessions.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.